Hello everyone, I'm Jill Holden. I'm the Principal Officer of the Early Childhood Unit here at the National Children's Bureau, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk, and we're going to be talking about children's self-regulation in the early years. Suzanne, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat to me today. Would you mind just giving us a brief introduction to yourself and your work, please?
Jill, it's a delight to be here. I'm always fascinated to talk with anyone who wants to talk about children's development. I'm a research scientist, and I was for nearly 20 years at the University of Dundee, studying children's development and babies' development and why relationships matter so much to our biological and neurological development, which I think is fascinating. It's about 10 years ago now that I stepped away from full-time academic work to try to translate that information to the public, because I thought that everyone deserved to know what I knew as an academic. And I thought it would really make a difference to parents and early years staff and teachers and politicians and police officers and everybody who deals with human beings. And I find lots of people are really interested in it, and I'm delighted to be here today talking with your early years staff.
Fabulous, thank you so much. So if I kick off with a few questions, if that's all right. So as you're aware, the revised Early Years Foundation stage includes early learning goals for self-regulation, and there's been much discussion about this in the early years sector. And it's something that many have asked us to cover as part of these events in order to support practitioners in best supporting children. So it would be great if you could just start off by explaining what self-regulation is and why that's important.
Absolutely. And it's such a fantastic question, because we're dealing with self-regulation all of the time of both children and grown-ups. But lots of people don't know that, because even the term self-regulation is not common in our society, in our culture, and even in our professions, which is fascinating once you realize what it is. So what is self-regulation? Self-regulation is the ability to cope with your feelings, okay, with your emotions. And we often don't, we're not often sometimes aware of our emotions or of children's emotions. We're much more aware of their behavior. But actually, it's not the way to think about it. Behavior comes from emotions. So you self-regulate emotional states. That is your biology. And so how do you help yourself when you're feeling something like frustration or disappointment or excitement or hunger or cold or loneliness? And I like mixing all of those up, because in our culture, we have this idea that cold and hunger is a bodily state, and that's different from loneliness and frustration and disappointment and excitement. But that's not true. All of those are bodily states, and that means that they're part of our stress system, if you want to use that language. So when you have emotions, and especially big emotions, it gets in your body, it gets in your stress state, and your body has to be able to cope with those. And for little children, for babies, they don't have a stress system that can do that. So they need help with those big emotions. It's really easy to get overwhelmed. And understanding that you need help with that helps adults to understand the role that they can play in that. Because what we see on the outside is the behavior. So a temper tantrum is a great example. We call it a temper tantrum in our society. We see it as children misbehaving, because very often they do inconvenient things. They throw a strop, they do that in public. We get embarrassed because you're a parent in Asda's and your child is throwing themselves on the ground, kicking and screaming, and the other adults are looking at you going, can you control that child? It's very easy to slip into seeing that as bad and therefore needing some sort of punishment. It's a child who's overwhelmed. Their immature stress system, their self-regulatory system, can't cope with whatever feeling they're having. So if I keep going with this example, they've just seen a chocolate bar. And the chocolate bar is at their level. Put it there for them in the trolley. And you're their mother, and you told them that you love them, and now they just would like that chocolate bar, please. And you said, no, that's called a boundary. What do you mean, no? I can't, but you love me, and I want the chocolate bar, and somebody's put it there. Okay, I'm trying to make it big, and if people are looking at this, I hope are laughing at my big story, but I'm trying to make it big because that's the bigness of their feelings. And so they're having, in this little scenario that I just made up, which any parent of a 2-year-old will recognize, they're having a whole clash of feelings: desire for the chocolate bar, frustration that you said no, maybe confusion about why you said no, betrayal that you said no, and they can't cope with all that clash of feelings, and that gets overwhelmed in their stress system, and then they have a meltdown. Okay, two, just because I've come up with that example, 2 is a particularly big time for temper tantrums, because your world has got a lot bigger, and because you can get to more things, because you can walk really steadily now, because you have a sense of a bigger world and more exciting things in it than the world that you saw when you were 1-year-old. But you don't have a stress system that can always cope with your feelings that you encounter in that world. And so temper tantrums are a good example of the way that you would see stress at around that age. And I have tried to make that into a big, deep story there, because our culture often is not in tune with that, and therefore is sometimes not very interested in what 2-year-olds are feeling, because we didn't know that it was about feelings, and we thought it was about controlling behavior. So what I'm trying to say with that long description is that self-regulation is all about children's emotional states, how we can help with that, especially when that is hard, and what do we need to do as grown-ups to get more curious about what children are feeling so that we can help. That's a good way to describe that, is co-regulation through relationships, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. But just keeping in mind that self-regulation is about the stress system and about feelings first before we start to think about behavior. Jill, does that help?
Absolutely, yeah, fabulous, thank you. And I love your example there as well, Suzanne, and I'm sure it's something that everybody listening will be able to relate to, having probably experienced similar types of situations. So one of the new early learning goals around self-regulation states that children at the expected level will show an understanding of their own feelings and those of others, and that they'll begin to regulate behaviour accordingly. So can you just explain a little bit more about what that means, but more important as well, how we can support early years practitioners to be able to support children in doing that?
If we think about the phrase challenging behavior for a moment, that's a really common phrase, challenging behavior. I know of a school that changed that, and they now call it, instead of challenging behavior, they call it distressed behavior. And I'm giving that example here because it helps us to think about behavior as guided by distress. And distressed behavior is the kind of thing that is very often frustrating to schools' earlier staff. So it's when distressed behavior would come from when you kick somebody, or you bite another child, or you hit them over the head with the tractor that they just took off your hands. Or you are struggling to part from your parents at the beginning of the day. Okay, I'm trying to call up examples of the sorts of things that are often confusing to adults and sometimes frustrating to them. So let's go back to hitting a child over the head with a tractor. So you have a child who is happily playing with a toy. I've just made up a tractor. And another child with these young, early, immature stress systems would like to play with that tractor. Thank you very much. And so I really, really want to play with that tractor. So I'll just have it. Thank you very much. And they whip it off the other child. Please laugh. I want us all to laugh, because that helps us to then get more curious. If you're a young child and you really, really, really want someone else's tractor, it's hard to cope with those big feelings of desire. Okay, now I don't mean that it's okay to go and whip the tractor off another child. I don't mean that children don't need boundaries. I don't mean that children don't need to become aware and helped to become aware of other children's feelings and needs. What I do mean is that if we can't get curious as the grown-ups about the feelings that are going on underneath that behavior, then we make things worse, because we maybe see that child as badly behaved because you took that tractor. And what we need to do is we need to help children know how to give the tractor back. We need to help children cope with their disappointment that they can't have the tractor. We need to not shame children into the times that they struggle. So if we are quick to jump to punishment rather than to boundaries and to making repairs where things went wrong, then we end up creating shame for children. And that's really common. People do that all the time without realizing they're doing it or meaning to. If we can help children to cope with big feelings, to help them to develop the ability to, well, I'm going to use the word regulate so that the feelings don't get too big, then the behavior follows naturally from that. Now, that will take time. That will mean that there are going to be lots of inconvenient moments along the way. There will be tractor hitting episodes. There will be kicking episodes. There will be times in which children don't listen. The more curious we can get as adults rather than frustrated, then the more we can help. And I guess that's one of the key things that I'm hoping people will take away from today is the need for curiosity about what children are feeling, even in the midst of inconvenient behavior. Because again, our society very often shifts to a place of control and punishment much more quickly than it shifts to curiosity. And understanding that behavior is driven by emotional states, stress states underneath, helps us to get closer to that place of curiosity, I think. Jill, did I answer your question? I'm having a great time talking about this.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, and I think being able to give practitioners this additional language that helps them understand and define what we've got in the early learning goals and how we can break that down to language as well that helps support them in their practice is really, really useful. So thank you for that.
And in fact, let me come back to one other bit of your question. If adults get overwhelmed by their feelings and can't self-regulate, meaning take care of them, meaning calm down with them, meaning know how to help themselves, like if I went for a walk, I would calm down. Like if I got a good night's sleep, that will help me to be less grumpy. Like if I could say what I need from my partner or my colleague, I can ask for what I need rather than having to cope with this on my own. All of those are ways to help with self-regulation. But if there are lots of adults who struggle to do that, it's not surprising that there are lots of children who struggle to do that. They are just developing the capacity to have a stress system that can regulate all of those different physiological states, remembering that emotions are physiological states. So when we're talking about understanding your own emotions, your own feelings, and understanding those of others, absolutely we want a society, we want families, we want classrooms where children can do that. But it's a process and children need help developing that capacity. And so one of the important ways to help with that is just to name feelings for children. Lots of children grow up in families where the names for feelings are just not part of the language that's used. And if the names for feelings aren't part of a classroom culture, then where else will they learn them? And I think it is absolutely fascinating that there's research that shows very clearly that when children can name feelings, their brain literally, different things happen in their brain. So when you can name big feelings like I'm scared, I'm disappointed, I'm sad, the brain produces different kinds of neurotransmitters, and that helps to calm those feelings. So if you don't have language for feelings, you're literally in a different biological state. So helping children to have names for what they're feeling is a great way to help children develop those capacities. And it sounds so simple. Lots of people would think just naming feelings. Well, if you don't know the names for feelings, then you drown in those feelings. I think what we want is a society of adults who know what they're feeling and can know how to take care of those feelings, because sometimes feelings are really, really sore.
That's brilliant, thank you. And I think, like you said, it's a simple strategy, but in my experience, it's often the simple things that are the most effective, and that being able to support children to name their feelings, that's a really great top tip for our practitioners to take away from today as well. So thank you for that. Suzanne, you talked a few moments ago about co-regulation. Could you tell us a little bit more about what co-regulation is, why it's so important for babies and young children, and how our earliest practitioners can help and facilitate that?
Oh, absolutely. Co-regulation basically means relationships. Okay, so if young children can't manage all those big feelings on their own, they need help from other people to help with that. And so that's a relationship. But the thing that is so fascinating about that is that babies are born connected. Okay, human beings come into the world already connected emotionally, physiologically to other people. And by that I mean they come into the world, we come into the world with a brain that expects people to have faces, and with a brain that is tuned in to the rhythm of exchanges and communication, with a brain that is tracking, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, a brain that is paying attention to eyebrow shifts, a brain that is making meaning of those exchanges. Lots of people don't know that. And it becomes really fascinating to think that your baby, only minutes old, it is not just like passively observing the world. And by the world, of course, you can't see the world far away when you're a baby, but you can see this world. The baby's making meaning of the exchanges between themselves and you. And if we stop to be fascinated by that for a moment, it's an example of what I mean. We come into the world connected. So babies feel safe. Their stress system calms down when they feel responded to, when they feel heard by someone else. That's co-regulation. You literally relax. Your body produces calming hormones like oxytocin. When you feel safe, connected, heard, you feel like you belong. What words do I use to describe a baby's feeling? The baby isn't conscious of them, but the experiences matter hugely, because the experiences of calm, connection, help that a baby has goes on to shape their biology. It shapes the way their brain develops. It shapes the way your immune system develops. It shapes the amount, your kind of like baseline tension levels. When I'm overwhelmed, will someone come and help? When I'm cold, will someone come and help? When I'm lonely, will someone come and help? And that help has a biological impact. That's co-regulation. So actually, during this pandemic, part of our struggle as a society has been the lack of co-regulation. If you have missed somebody you love, if you have missed hugs, if you have missed simply being in a cafe where you can hear the buzz of other people's voice, if you have missed the smell of your mom's perfume, if you self-isolated in a room, in a house where your children were in the other room, but you self-isolated because you were afraid that you had COVID. I'm trying to give those examples. What we missed was co-regulation. Because being around other people, if you trust them and you're not guarded and you're not suspicious and you're not anxious about other people, it helps human beings to calm down. Now, some people grow up in environments like families or schools where they learned that other people don't listen to them, where showing your feelings actually gets people to shout at you, gets you in trouble. So you learn that other people don't help you. They're not interested in what you feel. And that expectation about how relationships work gets built into your brain and your body unconsciously. And what you learned was that other people are a threat, that they're dangerous, that they abandon you, if you want to use that language. So you don't turn to them for help. And if you can't turn to other people for help in times of struggle, you have a more limited set of options. So if I go big for a minute, Jill, if we all need help calming when we get stressed, and if we can't do that unconsciously internally, then we need something external to help. And all of us need external help. So we might go for a walk, we might do yoga, we might have a drink, we might take more water, we might get out our knitting because it helps us calm down. All of those are ways to self-regulate. Co-regulation for children helps you to develop a robust stress system that lets you self-regulate. But if you don't have robust experiences of co-regulation as an adult, then we have a lot of science that tells us you're more at risk of developing kinds of strategies that are not always healthy. So thinking about those links actually helps us to realize the importance of understanding the regulatory system and the development of it, and the importance of relationships in early years, because the research on trauma now tells us that adults who are addicted, that there's a very strong correlation with relationship difficulties when they were younger. And if families are struggling, and families are struggling all over the place with this pandemic, if families are struggling, then children will struggle. And the place that they will get most help is in early years setting. But they can't get that help if the early years staff don't understand what they're dealing with, which is one of the reasons that I'm so excited that we're talking about this today, because then early years staff can see that the relationships they make with children really, really make a difference, not just to now, and they do, they'll make a difference to behavior now, but they also make a difference to the way that children develop. And that means that they make, early years staff make a tremendous difference for the future in ways that they'll never see. But if they know how important they are, then that helps in the really struggly moments that you're struggling with a child's behavior right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's just brilliant to hear as well. And I think you're absolutely spot on about that importance of our early years sector and the fantastic job that they're doing out there and have continued to do throughout this really, really challenging year as well. So yeah, thank you. Suzanne, before we finish, have you got 3 top tips that you would give our early years practitioners to help them support children's self-regulation, children's emotions? Have you got 3 top tips for either what they can do or their environment?
Absolutely. Okay, the first one is name feelings. Just make feelings a part of your environment, do lots of talking about it, make it a standard part of culture, of your classroom culture. As soon as there is any behavior that you're focusing on, especially the ones that are, a struggle for you, start by talking about feelings. Help the child calm down first, and then talk about feelings. In other words, don't go straight to behavioral strategies. Start with talking about feelings. Secondly, breathe. Breathing is a way to help the body to calm down. I sometimes talk about saber-toothed tigers and teddy bears as a way to understand all of that. I've not talked about that today, but it's one of the resources out there if people want to get that. So if you think of running away from a saber-toothed tiger, you would need to be breathing really fast because you would need to be running really fast. We all breathe faster when we're stressed. So if you just breathe out, and you teach children to breathe out, you trick your body into believing that there is no danger here, even if emotionally you're still in a heightened state. So if you start by just breathing out, that helps the body to start to calm down. It creates space. It creates the brain starts to shift. So just doing a lot of making breathing, you know, an ordinary part of the day. So I know nurseries that do breathing exercises 3 times a day. They do yoga and stretching to help children be in touch with their bodies and to make that a habit. So thinking about breathing and being aware of breathing is another really good tip. And thirdly, the most important tip I can give is not to be aware of the children's emotional states, but to be aware of your own. The very most important part of the environment, really for all age people, but especially for young children, the most important part of the environment is you. So you being able as a grown-up to regulate your own emotional state and to be aware of that will make a huge difference to the emotional state of the children around. So knowing when you are tense, knowing when you need help, knowing when you need a break, knowing that you can tell your other colleagues how you feel, creating staff teams where the exchange of those kinds of conversations without blame, without judgment, even when the staff member feels something that's a bit edgy, can you talk about that? Being able to talk about what you really feel creates trust and safety in a team. And if the grown-ups can do that, then they provide the kind of context that children can thrive and flourish within. Very often, we think we want to focus on what the children need to do and how we should teach the children. So sometimes it's a wee bit edgy to say that actually we need to have more self-awareness, but it is the most powerful thing you can start with.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Suzanne. That's been so helpful. And when you were talking about breathing, I could feel myself copying you, and it does really bring yourself down and really support you with children as well. So thank you so much. That's been so.
Can I just tell you, see what you just said? See, Jill, we'll be here all day. We're probably, I know this is probably supposed to be restricted. We'll be here all day, but it's because I think it's so fascinating. When you can feel yourself relax, because I made sure to demonstrate that that's your mirror neurons. Okay, so there's mirror neurons in the human brain which feel in your own body what you observe in other people's bodies. So if you see someone relax, the connection, that connection that I talked about that we're born with, literally feels it in your own body. So when you, what we typically call model for children, particular emotions or behavior, what happens is that mirror neurons are picking that up. And if that's positive, it also means that they're picking up when you're getting really tense. So that's why being aware of what you're feeling, it helps so much, because it creates this unconscious context in which children are developing. And I've just added that because I think it is really fascinating to know that there are these things called mirror neurons.
Yeah.
And that there's so much more that the science has told us that a lot of people don't get access to, that I think help to make this fascinating, and helps people to step into it rather than feel sometimes a bit burdened by the science. It helps it to be really curious and fascinating. And I hope that that's what I have brought today, is an increase in curiosity.
Fantastic. Well, you certainly have with me, Suzanne, and I'm sure everybody else who's listening will feel the same way too. So just to say a huge thank you for your time again today, Suzanne. That's just been so helpful and useful, and I know all the practitioners who get the pleasure of watching this recording will say thank you as well. So thank you very much indeed. Take care.
Thank you. Delight.